Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Everett Calloway always believed that love was built quietly, that the greatest acts of affection didn't come with applause or public declarations, but rather in small, daily gestures, like getting up earlier to make breakfast, covering his wife with a blanket when she fell asleep on the couch, or stepping aside so she could shine. From the very start of his marriage to Adeline, he made a point of being her safe haven. He worked tirelessly, took on double shifts, extra meetings, and gave up anything that might distract him from what he considered most sacred, family. Adeline always had refined tastes. She loved expensive dinners, trips to exotic destinations, designer clothes, and gifts with gold ribbons. Even when Everett saw their bank balance running low, he took a deep breath and found a way. He believed their love was stronger than any financial setback. More than that, he believed they were building an empire together. When he decided to open his own business, a medical equipment distributor, he didn't hesitate to list Adeline as a partner. He told everyone it was purely symbolic, a gift, a way of saying, "You're as much a part of this as I am." And she would smile, hug him sweetly, praise his generosity, but never got involved in the daily operations. She didn't even ask about reports, clients, or signed contracts. Still, Everett kept on believing she was by his side. In the early years, he took pride in every achievement. He remembered coming home exhausted at night, eating cold snacks in the car, ignoring calls from friends because, "I can't today, I have too much work." None of that mattered when he saw Adeline happy. Her smile fueled him. Sometimes, she hosted small get-togethers with her friends and talked about the results of our company, as if she really took part, as if she worked and shared in the victories with him. From the other side of the room, Everett would smile too, feeling proud. He never wanted recognition, he just wanted to be sure he was doing the right thing. At that time, he believed he was. The sacrifices grew gradually. He sold his car to pay off a huge credit card bill, cancelled a trip he'd planned with his sick father, everything to cover the kitchen renovation Adeline wanted so badly. At family gatherings, she insisted on wearing famous brands while Everett stuck to his usual suits, discreet and slightly worn. She seemed to light up any room she walked into, and deep down, he was proud of that too. It was as if he'd built a palace for her to live in like a queen, even if he himself slept on the floor of that castle. Some days, fatigue overwhelmed him. His body felt heavy, his eyes burned, and his head pounded with so many bills, deadlines, and goals. But when he got home and saw Adeline in front of the fireplace with a glass of wine, he told himself it was all worth it. "She deserves this," he repeated to himself. Whenever bad news arrived, a client backing out, a shipment getting lost, or a target missed, he kept it to himself. He didn't want to worry her, he felt his role was to protect, provide, and make sure everything was okay. Complaining seemed like a sign of weakness. Everett strongly believed in partnership. He used to say that marriage was like rowing in the same direction with consistent effort. He saw Adeline as someone who was by his side, even if she didn't take part in the practical tasks. He believed she took care of other things, that her contribution was offering emotional support, that her presence was that invisible support behind the scenes. Sometimes, when he watched her sleep, he felt a strange twinge, a sense that something was off, but he pushed those thoughts away. He always preferred to see the best in her, to give her the benefit of the doubt, as if loving someone also meant choosing what to overlook. But there were signs. Little by little, Adeline started making comments she hadn't made before. She questioned whether the company was growing enough, wondered if he shouldn't bring in fresh blood for management. She suggested hires that made no sense, asked for increases on the corporate card for women's expenses, and occasionally mentioned someone named Arlo as a friend who understood modern management. Everett found it odd, but he trusted her. He believed in her so much that he figured his mind was just blowing things out of proportion. Whenever a doubt arose, he found a way to explain it, to justify her behavior. Time passed, and the distance between them grew without him noticing. They lived in the same house, but it felt like different planets. He kept on working, fighting, doing his best. Meanwhile, Adeline seemed to float in a parallel reality, where everything was pretty, easy, and comfortable. The weight of each decision fell on Everett's shoulders, but he kept his head up, believing day after day that it was all going to pay off. Until the day he opened that email. That click was the beginning of the end, even though he didn't know it yet. That email did more than spark suspicion, it opened a wound that would keep hurting for a long time. Everett read and reread that automated notification, trying to understand why a large payment was leaving the company's account for a name he didn't recognize. It was a tiny detail, almost invisible, but it was there, a loose thread. And Everett, always meticulous, started pulling on that thread carefully, like someone defusing a bomb. Rather than act on impulse, he did what he always did, he used discipline. For days, he pretended life was normal. He had breakfast with Adeline, accompanied her to social dinners, and asked casual questions about her day. But at night, when the house was quiet, he immersed himself in spreadsheets, statements, and forgotten backups. He discovered split payments, shell companies, wire transfers disguised by vague terms like external consulting or executive coaching. Everything pointed to a systematic embezzlement of funds, always going to the same recipient, a bank account in the name of Arlo Preston. That name echoed in his mind, a personal trainer Adeline had taken classes with for a while, a guy she always called just a friend. Everett didn't want to believe it, but the documents, the dates, the amounts, all of it lined up cruelly. It wasn't just an affair, it was betrayal on multiple levels, financial, emotional, moral. And he, the man who had given everything to that marriage, now realized he'd been caught in a scheme orchestrated by the very person who should have been his partner. After gathering all the evidence, physical and digital, Everett spent the entire night sitting in silence, staring at that pile of papers as if it were a shattered mirror reflecting everything he'd lived through in the past years. He didn't cry or sleep. He just waited for sunrise with the calm of someone who has already made a decision. That afternoon, Adeline came home talking on the phone, smiling, carrying shopping bags. She seemed happy, at peace, as if living in a completely different world. Everett asked her to hang up, his tone was calm, but something was different, and she noticed. She asked if everything was okay, and he just said, "We need to talk." They sat down in the living room, and Everett was holding a sheet of paper. It was a copy of the bank statement showing one of the transfers to Arlo. He handed it to her with an unsettling calm. "Do you recognize this?" Adeline read it, gave a nervous laugh, and tried to brush it off with a joke. "Oh, honey, this must be the finance team's doing. You know I don't understand these things." But Everett interrupted. He took out another document, then another, and another. Each one had data, screenshots, contracts, emails. He had everything mapped out. Adeline began to lose her color, the confident look in her eyes now trembled with panic. She folded her arms, shifted in her seat, tried to make excuses, but Everett wouldn't allow any distractions. When he laid on the table a message in which she told an employee, "Relax, he'll never see this. Everett signs everything without looking. That's how he is," the room went silent. Adeline tried to turn the tables, questioned him, complained about his tone, accused him of invading her privacy. But Everett, still calm, took a deep breath and spoke with contained intensity. "I was your partner, your companion, your friend. I put your name on my dream. I gave you more than I gave myself, and you destroyed all that behind my back, out of ambition, vanity, and for him." She tried to laugh, as if she still believed she could control the situation. "You're overreacting. It's not that serious. We can handle this without drama." That's when he stood up, took an envelope with the divorce papers, and dropped it on the table. He spoke firmly, "There's no more us, Adeline. This marriage is over. And now we'll handle everything the way you chose, with paperwork and the truth." Adeline jumped up from the couch. The confidence in her eyes had turned into desperation. She tried to grab his arm, beg, backtrack, but Everett just looked at her without anger, without hate, only with the empty gaze of someone who realized their love had been thrown away. At the hearing a few days later, Adeline showed up with her lawyers, flawless makeup, carrying herself like she still believed she had the upper hand. She probably thought emotional pressure would make Everett cave. Maybe she believed he still cared enough about her to protect her. But the Everett who walked into that room was a different man, not the loving husband who took on everything in the name of us. Now, he was a man who had chosen himself. When the judge asked him to speak, Everett simply handed over his folder. Inside, the same methodical organization that guided his life now exposed the truth. There were bank statements, printed emails, transaction logs, even a transcript of the conversation with Adeline. The judge read everything in silence, the mood shifted with each page. Adeline kept her eyes down, her mask was cracking, and seeing Arlo's name repeatedly as the direct recipient of those transfers was the final blow. The judge temporarily adjourned the session to review the material. When the session resumed, he issued a preliminary decision that changed the course of the process entirely, an immediate freeze on the wife's assets and the start of a full audit of the company. Adeline's eyes widened, her lawyers whispered among themselves. Arlo, mentioned by name in the documents, would now have to answer as an accomplice. Her downfall had begun, and no amount of makeup, excuses, or charm could hold it all together. Everett just watched, with the same calm he used to offer her in every situation. Now, he offered her the cold, undeniable truth. In the days following the hearing, Adeline clung to the only thing she still thought she could control: appearances. She kept posting old photos on social media, smiling at events from weeks ago, writing vague captions about fresh starts and new beginnings, in a desperate attempt to uphold an image that had already collapsed. Her world, once kept afloat by luxury, influence, and convenience, was starting to crack on all sides. Close friends began avoiding her, relatives kept their distance at family gatherings, and even the brands that used to send her products for promotion quietly disappeared. Her name, which once opened doors, now made some slam shut without ceremony. Arlo, once so confident and charming, her hidden partner, changed overnight. The playful tone vanished, he stopped replying to messages right away, he was busy more often, and even went off the grid for 3 days straight. When she finally managed to see him in person, he was cold, impatient, as if he was being crushed by something that had recently seemed like an exciting adventure. They sat in an out-of-the-way cafe, away from curious eyes. She tried to talk, begged, insisted that everything was under control. Arlo was restless, constantly checking his phone, giving short, distant answers. He didn't promise any support, didn't show loyalty. At the end of their meeting, he got up and said, "If this gets me in trouble, I'll tell everything." "You know that." Adeline shivered. For the first time since this all began, she realized she was on her own. She no longer had a husband's shield willing to do anything for her, nor the protection of a network of favors and contacts. Now, she was just a woman about to lose it all, surrounded by suspicious looks and the consequences of her own choices. Local papers started running the first rumors about the case. A gossip blog that covered financial scandals posted a short note: "Businesswoman involved in marital and corporate fraud scandal." That headline alone was enough for some stores to cancel partnerships and for businesses to rethink advertising deals. Adeline tried to deny everything, saying it was just gossip from envious people, distortions, or a bitter divorce. But nobody seemed interested in listening. Meanwhile, the case moved forward like an unstoppable tide. The audit uncovered more irregularities, more names came up. Emails from her account were matched with bank records. Her lawyers tried to build a defense based on her lack of technical knowledge, but the dates, signatures, and internal communications put Adeline right at the center of each fraudulent transaction. They requested another hearing to try to make a deal, appealed to the couple's history, to the emotional turmoil of the breakup, even claimed Adeline had been mentally unstable in recent months. Everything was refuted by the evidence. And whenever Everett spoke, the judge listened intently. There was something in his voice, in his composure, an injured dignity, but unshaken. Adeline found herself in limbo. The apartment where she'd been living was under legal review, her credit cards were frozen, and her financial transactions were limited. She had to cancel an international trip because her passport was held due to the investigation. She tried asking acquaintances in the business world for help, but no one wanted to get involved. One person even messaged her, "You got yourself into this, now fix it yourself." The nights grew long, the same walls that once housed her life of luxury now felt suffocating. She spent hours on the living room couch, staring at nothing. Memories of Everett started to haunt her painfully, not the man who held her back with his routine, but someone who had always been there despite it all. She remembered the times he surprised her with flowers even after exhausting shifts, when he'd gently say, "Take it easy on the spending," with a tired smile, and how she'd roll her eyes, calling him cheap. She thought about those Sunday mornings when he'd make breakfast while she still slept, and how he'd say, "I've got this, don't worry," whenever things went off track. It was as though, for the first time, she saw it all through the eyes of someone who had lost it. Her expensive clothes, now collecting dust in the closet, no longer made sense. Her imported high heels, bags, and French perfume seemed out of place in this new reality. Her identity, once propped up by external shine, had collapsed before a mirror that showed only an ordinary woman, exhausted and trapped by her own mistakes. One morning, she woke up to a note from the building manager. Her name was being removed from the lease. The property was transferred to the company's name, now under legal dispute. She had just a few days left to move out. She picked up her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and realized that all those people who had clung to her like bees to honey were now just a list of silent, unresponsive numbers. She thought of calling Arlo, but something told her it wasn't worth it. He wouldn't answer, and even if he did, there was nothing left to say. That afternoon, for the first time, she truly cried. It wasn't anger or shame, it was pure helplessness. She wept softly, without makeup, without an audience, a deep, painful sob. And as the tears flowed, she whispered to herself, trying to believe there was still a way to fix everything. But deep down, she knew that some choices come at a price, and for years, she had accumulated emotional debts that were now coming due all at once. The sky was gray when Adeline showed up at the house she once shared with Everett. She parked far away, walked through a light drizzle without an umbrella, pulling her coat tight more from shame than from the cold. The wet sidewalk reflected her distorted image, matching how she felt inside, a broken version of herself, almost unrecognizable. Each step toward the front door felt heavier than the last, as if the porch steps had doubled in height. She paused for a moment, looked around, and took a deep breath. Her face showed the signs of sleepless nights and painful silences. Her lipstick was understated, her hair tied back without much care, and she carried a simple, worn leather bag, so different from the woman who once crossed that street in high heels and designer sunglasses. She rang the doorbell with hesitation, waiting, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might jump out of her chest. Her hands were shaking, cold. Hearing footsteps from the other side of the door, she held her breath. Everett answered. He was wearing a gray t-shirt, dark sweatpants, and was barefoot, his hair a bit messy and a slight beard showing, looking relaxed, almost homey. But there was something in his eyes that made it clear the door was now a boundary between the past and the present. Adeline tried to smile, but her voice came out quiet, trembling. I had to see you." Everett stayed silent for a few seconds, watching her, as if trying to figure out whether she was real or just a memory of before. He stepped aside and opened the door a bit more, polite but not exactly welcoming. She walked in slowly. The house still smelled familiar, but the atmosphere was different, simpler, lighter, almost minimalist. The photos of the two of them, once displayed on the walls, were gone. There was a new plant in the living room, a guitar leaning against a wall, a mug of still warm tea on the coffee table. She sat on the edge of the couch, as if taking up space that no longer belonged to her. Everett stayed standing, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "I messed everything up," she said, staring at the floor. "I got lost in it all, the money, the feeling of power, feeling wanted. I completely confused myself. I traded something real for an illusion." He watched her calmly, without interrupting, no anger, no sympathy, just listening. Adeline went on, "I thought I could still fix it, that there was something between us worth saving. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I'm tired, I'm alone, Anne. I miss you." Silence followed. Only the soft sound of rain against the window could be heard. Everett walked over to a small cabinet next to the couch and opened a drawer, with the same calm as someone who knows exactly what he's looking for. He pulled out a $1 bill folded in four, walked back to her, and handed it over gently. "This is all that's left," he said. Adeline took the bill, her hands shaking. She looked at him and then at that dollar. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't blink them away. She knew this wasn't reconciliation, it was closure. Speaking softly and firmly, Everett said, "I rebuilt myself, and now I'm whole. I'm not going to give just half of myself anymore." She wanted to respond, to beg for another chance, to say she'd learned, that she could change. But there was no longer any room for promises. The door behind her seemed to be calling her, reminding her it was time to go. She stood up slowly, clutching that bill as though it weighed more than iron bars, and walked to the exit without looking back. Opening the door, the cold wind hit her face, as if the outside world barely recognized her now. Everett just watched. He waited until she crossed the street, a small figure in the drizzle that gradually faded into the city's gray. He stayed there for a few more minutes, at peace. It was finally over, and it didn't hurt. It was an ending that needed to happen, clear and freeing. He turned around, picked up his mug, took a sip of tea, and looked ahead with the quiet resolve of someone who realized that sometimes, you have to lose yourself completely before you can truly find yourself. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything new. See you next time.